This is a story about imagination. With imagination, you can be anyone you want to be. You can go anywhere you want to be. You can do anything you want to do. Imagination is a wonderful thing. In this story, Ruby uses her imagination to write a story about her favourite toy, Mr. Fox. Ruby was sitting at her desk with Mr. Fox, her favourite stuffed animal. She was thinking very hard when her mother came into the room. "You look very thoughtful, Ruby. What are you thinking about?" Ruby replied, "I want to write a story about me and Mr. Fox, but I don't know how to do it." Her mum told her, "You need to use your imagination, Ruby, and first write down the important points. Where does the story take place? Who's in the story? What happens? How does it end? Then you can use your imagination. Just close your eyes and picture the story. I'm sure you will be able to write a good story." Her mum left the room and Ruby began to think about her story. She wrote down some points. First, the story happens in a different place. I get there by magic. Mr. Fox and Stitch are there. Mr. Fox is sad. I help Mr. Fox. Everyone is happy, and I go home. Ruby closed her eyes and began to imagine her story. Ruby's story. Ruby was at the local church sale. She was carrying Mr. Fox because she never went anywhere without him. There were lots of interesting things for sale, but the one that she really liked was a round glass ball. It was very plain and rather cloudy, but for some reason she seemed drawn to it. The ball was only 50p, so Ruby bought it and took it home. When she arrived home, Ruby went to her bedroom and sat cuddling Mr. Fox. "I wish you were real," she said to Mr. Fox, and gave him a hug. Ruby put the ball on her desk and started to clean it with a wipe. As she did this, the ball suddenly started to glow. Ruby was startled by this and looked close at the ball. She began to feel dizzy, and the room seemed to spin around her. Ruby closed her eyes tightly, wondering what was happening. The dizziness suddenly stopped, and she opened her eyes slowly. Ruby looked around and was really shocked by what she saw. She was no longer in her room, but in a place which looked like a forest. It was no ordinary forest, though. The trees were a bright red colour, and the leaves were blue. It looked like a picture from a fairy tale. Suddenly, Ruby heard a noise coming from the bushes nearby. She was frightened by this, wondering what it could be, but was astounded when out jumped Mr. Fox. Not a toy Mr. Fox, but a real Mr. Fox. Ruby was not frightened now. She was very excited to see a real Mr. Fox. She ran up to him and put her arms round his neck. She said, "I'm so happy to meet you, Mr. Fox. I was wishing you were real, and here you are." Then something even more exciting happened. Ruby heard a voice saying, "Hello." She looked round and was astonished to see Stitch, not a toy Stitch, but a real one. Mr. Fox and Stitch looked very sad, and Ruby said, "You both look very sad. What's wrong?" Mr. Fox replied, "There's a big, nasty lion in the forest, and he has taken our friend away in his mouth. Can you help us save our friend?" Ruby said, "My name is Ruby, and I will try to help if I can. What's your friend like?" "His name is Fred, and he is a baby fox," said Mr. Fox. "A baby fox? asked Ruby. "What does he look like?" Mr. Fox smiled at Ruby. "Use your imagination, Ruby, and you can picture him." "Okay, I can picture Fred, but where's the lion now?" Ruby asked. Mr. Fox replied, "His den is across the river, not too far from here, but I don't know how you can save my friend." "We'll have to try. Let's go," said Ruby. Mr. Fox, Stitch, and Ruby set off towards the river. Ruby wasn't sure just how she could get Fred back from the lion. Then she had an idea. She thought, as this is the land of imagination, I can imagine there's a big hole in the path, and I can get the lion to chase me and fall into it. After a little while they came to the river. It was wide and seemed very deep. "How can we get across?" she asked Mr. Fox. Mr. Fox replied, "There are some stones sticking out of the water. If you are careful, you can step on these to get across. Be careful, as they can be very slippery." Ruby saw the stones and very carefully stepped on each one until she was safely across the river. After that, Mr. Fox and Stitch came across, stepping very carefully on each stone until they were both safely across. As Ruby went along the path, she imagined the big hole in the path with just enough room for her to get around. It didn't take long before she came to the lion's den. The lion was lying down with the baby fox in his mouth. "He hasn't eaten Fred yet, so I may be able to save him," she thought. Ruby told Mr. Fox that she would go and get the lion to chase her, that they should stand at the far edge of the hole waving their arms. Ruby stood up and waved her arms, shouting, "Come and get me, Mr. Lion. We're not scared of you." The lion roared loudly and rose to his feet, dropping Fred to the floor. Ruby turned and ran, and the lion chased after. When she got to the hole, Ruby was just able to get around it safely. Both Mr. Fox and Stitch waved their arms and shouted at the lion. The lion was so mad he didn't see the hole and fell into it. He roared in anger, but couldn't get out. Ruby ran back to the den, picked Fred up in her arms, and went quickly back to the river to Mr. Fox and Stitch. She was extra careful crossing on the stones and managed to get safely across. Ruby put Fred on the floor, and he ran up to Mr. Fox happily. "Thank you for saving Fred," said Mr. Fox. "I am very grateful, and you was very brave to do what you did." Ruby went up to Mr. Fox and put her arms round his neck and said, "Both you and Stitch were very brave too. The lion might have jumped over the hole, but you made him too mad to think about it. I was really glad I could help you, and I am so happy to have met you." Suddenly Ruby began to feel dizzy again. The trees seemed to spin round. She closed her eyes until the dizziness stopped. When Ruby opened her eyes, she was back at her desk, with her arms round Mr. Fox. Ruby read through the story, checking that there were no mistakes. Then her mother came into the room and asked, "Did you manage to write a story, Ruby?" Ruby replied, "Yes, Mum. Would you like to read it?" Her mum sat down and read Ruby's story. When she had finished, she said, "That was a very good story, Ruby. Have you decided on a title for it?" Ruby replied, "I think I will call it Ruby and the Magic Ball." Ruby used her imagination to write this story. Why don't you use your imagination and write one yourself?